It was supposed to be just another day at work for the flight attendant. She had been doing this job for over 10 years, and she knew the drill inside out. Greet passengers with a smile, help them find their seats, stow away bags if needed, and make sure everything ran smoothly before takeoff. But little did she know this flight would turn into something completely unexpected. A story that would spread like wildfire across news channels and social media platforms. The morning started like any other. The sun was shining brightly as people lined up at Gate 23, waiting to board Flight 723 from New York to Los Angeles. Passengers were chatting, scrolling through their phones or sipping coffee while trying to wake up fully. It seemed like a typical crowd. Families with kids, business travelers in suits, tourists with backpacks, and a few solo flyers scattered around. As the boarding process began, one passenger stood out without even trying. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with an air of quiet confidence. His dark skin glowed under the fluorescent lights of the terminal, and his calm demeanor made him seem almost regal. What no one on the plane knew, not even the crew, was that this man wasn't just another traveler. He was the newly appointed CEO of the airline, flying incognito to get a first-hand look at the customer experience. He didn't announce who he was because he wanted to blend in, to see what regular passengers went through during their journeys. Little did he know, this decision would lead to an encounter that would change both his life and the life of the flight attendant forever. The flight attendant, meanwhile, was feeling the usual pre-flight jitters. Flying could be unpredictable, and every day brought its own set of challenges. Some days it was cranky toddlers throwing tantrums. Other days it was demanding executives complaining about legroom. Today, though, felt different somehow. There was a strange energy in the air, like the universe was hinting that things wouldn't go exactly according to plan. When the man finally stepped onto the plane, he greeted her with a polite nod and headed toward his seat in first class. She noticed him glance briefly at the overhead compartments, probably deciding where to put his bag. Everything seemed normal so far, but then came the moment that would alter everything. As he adjusted his carry-on, the bag accidentally brushed against the flight attendant's shoulder. It wasn't a hard hit, it barely registered as contact, but it startled her. In her defense, she had already been on edge thanks to a long shift and a hectic boarding process. Her nerves frayed instantly, and instead of brushing it off, she reacted harshly. "Watch it," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversations in the cabin. The man turned toward her, clearly surprised by her reaction. "I'm sorry," he said calmly. "It was an accident." But the apology didn't diffuse the tension. Instead, fueled by frustration and perhaps some unconscious bias, the flight attendant lost control. Before anyone could stop her, she raised her hand and slapped him across the face. The sound echoed through the plane like a gunshot. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Everyone stared in stunned silence, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, murmurs began rippling through the cabin. Phones came out as passengers recorded the scene, capturing every detail. The man stood there, his cheek reddening from the impact, but his expression remained composed. If anything, he looked more shocked than angry. "What is wrong with you?" he asked quietly, his voice steady despite the obvious sting of humiliation. The flight attendant froze, her eyes widening as reality crashed down on her. She realized too late what she had done. Her face flushed red, and panic set in as she scanned the room, meeting the wide-eyed gazes of dozens of passengers. Whispers filled the air, growing louder by the second. In that moment, the man decided to reveal something that would send shockwaves through the entire aircraft. With quiet authority, he pulled out his ID badge and showed it to the nearest crew member. "You work for me," he said firmly, "and I expect professionalism at all times." The words hit like a punch to the gut. The flight attendant's knees nearly buckled as the truth sank in. This wasn't just a random traveler she had insulted, it was the CEO of the airline. And now, not only had she embarrassed herself, but she had also created a situation that could cost her career. The plane sat grounded as chaos unfolded on board. Passengers debated loudly about what had happened, some siding with the CEO, others criticizing the flight attendant's behavior. Meanwhile, the captain hurried to the scene, attempting to restore order. Back at headquarters, alarm bells were ringing as reports of the incident reached top management. For the flight attendant, the weight of her actions, and their implications, was only beginning to sink in. She had let her emotions get the better of her, and now she faced consequences that would ripple far beyond this single flight. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a much larger story, one that would test her character, challenge the airline's values, and ultimately spark a conversation about respect, accountability, and humanity in the skies. The slap echoed through the cabin, a sharp crack that silenced every conversation. For a moment it felt like time stood still. Passengers who had been chatting or scrolling on their phones suddenly looked up, their eyes darting between the man and the flight attendant. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. A few gasped audibly. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. The man stood there, his cheek reddening from the impact, but he didn't raise his voice or retaliate. Instead, his calm demeanor only seemed to grow stronger. "What is wrong with you?" he asked again, this time more firmly. His tone wasn't angry. It was measured, almost as if he was trying to understand why someone would react so explosively over such a minor incident. But the flight attendant couldn't respond. She froze, her hand still hovering in the air where she'd swung it moments earlier. Her face turned bright red, and tears welled up in her eyes as the weight of her actions hit her all at once. She hadn't meant to slap him, she knew that much, but something inside her had snapped. Stress, fatigue, maybe even an unconscious bias she hadn't realized she carried. Whatever it was, it had led to this unthinkable moment. Passengers began, whispering among themselves, some defending the man, others criticizing the flight attendant's behavior. One elderly woman shook her head disapprovingly, muttering under her breath about how no one deserved to be treated like that. A young couple sitting nearby pulled out their phones and started recording the scene, capturing not just the aftermath, but also the growing tension in the cabin. Social media was about to get its next viral moment. Realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, the man decided to take charge. With quiet authority, he stepped back slightly, giving himself space to think. Then, addressing the nearest crew member, he said, "Please call the captain. We need to resolve this before we proceed." His words sent another wave of shock through the cabin. The flight attendant, now trembling visibly, tried to apologize. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice breaking. "It was an accident, I didn't mean to." Before she could finish, the man interrupted her, not rudely but with a firmness that commanded attention. "Accidents happen," he said, "but your reaction crossed a line. I expect professionalism here, especially from those representing this airline." That's when he revealed something that changed everything. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out an ID badge and handed it to the surprised crew member. "You work for me," he said simply, "and I need to speak with the captain immediately." The room fell silent again, this time with a different kind of awe. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the badge. Some murmured in disbelief, "Is that the CEO?" Others whispered excitedly, speculating about what this meant for the flight, and for the poor flight attendant. As word spread, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. What had started as a tense confrontation turned into a spectacle, with everyone watching closely to see what would happen next. The flight attendant, meanwhile, was visibly crumbling under the pressure. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Not only had she embarrassed herself in front of dozens of passengers, but she had also assaulted the very person who oversaw her job. The captain arrived quickly, his expression serious as he took in the scene. After a brief exchange with the man, he escorted both him and the flight attendant to a private area near the cockpit to discuss the matter further. Meanwhile, the rest of the passengers were left to speculate. Conversations buzzed throughout the plane, ranging from outrage to sympathy to amusement. A few people even joked nervously about how this trip would make for quite the story later. Back in the galley, the flight attendant broke down completely. Between sobs, she pleaded with the captain to let her explain. "I swear, I didn't know who he was," she said. "It was just, I've had such a long day, and when his bag hit me, I lost it. It wasn't personal, I promise." The man listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he spoke again, his voice softer now. "I don't doubt that you're stressed," he said. "We all have bad days. But your actions affect others, and today they affected me. You can't treat people poorly based on assumptions or worse, biases." His words struck a chord, not just with the flight attendant but with everyone listening. Here was a man who could have easily demanded her termination on the spot. Yet he chose to handle the situation with grace and understanding. Still, he made it clear that there would be consequences. "This isn't just about us," he added. "It's about setting an example for the entire airline. Respect matters and accountability matters." By the time the discussion ended, the decision was made. The flight would continue as scheduled, but corporate headquarters would be notified about the incident. As the man returned to his seat, the cabin erupted into applause. Passengers clapped, not because they condoned his treatment, but because they respected how he handled the situation. He bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement, then settled back into his chair, looking thoughtful. For the flight attendant, however, the ordeal was far from over. She returned to her duties reluctantly, acutely aware of the stares and whispers, following her every move. Each step felt heavier than the last, each interaction more awkward. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had ruined not only her career, but also the reputation of the airline she had worked for so long. As the plane taxied down the runway and lifted off into the sky, the mood remained subdued. Passengers glanced at each other, exchanging knowing looks but saying little. Outside, the clouds stretched endlessly, offering a peaceful contrast to the storm brewing inside the cabin. The flight attendant moved mechanically through her tasks, avoiding eye contact whenever possible. The man, seated in first class, gazed out the window, lost in thought. No one knew it yet, but this incident would spark conversations far beyond the confines of the airplane. News outlets picked up the story within hours, turning it into a national debate about workplace conduct, racial bias, and corporate responsibility. Social media exploded with hashtags, opinion pieces, and heated discussions. Some defended the flight attendant, pointing out the immense stress faced by airline staff. Others sided with the CEO, emphasizing the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. For the airline itself, the fallout was immediate. Skyline Airways found itself at the center of a PR nightmare, with customers questioning whether the company truly valued equality and professionalism. Shareholders demanded answers, and executives scrambled to address the growing backlash. Internally, employees debated whether the punishment fit the crime, while externally, critics called for systemic changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. Amidst all the chaos, two questions lingered. What would become of the flight attendant? And how would the CEO use this moment to drive meaningful change? Little did anyone know, the answers to those questions would unfold in ways no one could have predicted. By the time the plane touched down in Los Angeles, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Passengers disembarked with their phones buzzing. News outlets were scrambling to cover the incident, and social media was ablaze with reactions. Videos recorded by passengers during the flight had gone viral, showing snippets of the confrontation and the CEO's calm yet firm response. The hashtag #TheRogerSkyline scandal trended worldwide, sparking debates about everything from workplace behavior to racial bias. For the airline, the pressure mounted almost instantly. Skyline Airways executives convened an emergency meeting at their headquarters, knowing they had to act quickly to contain the fallout. But this wasn't just a PR crisis. It was a moment that demanded leadership, accountability, and a commitment to change. The CEO, still composed despite the whirlwind surrounding him, took charge. He called for a press conference to address the public directly, refusing to let misinformation or speculation define the narrative. Meanwhile, The flight attendant found herself at the center of a storm she never could have anticipated. Suspended pending investigation, she retreated from the spotlight, overwhelmed by guilt and fear. Her friends and family rallied around her, offering support and urging her to seek help. They encouraged her to reflect on what had led to that explosive moment on the plane, and more importantly, how she could grow from it. The press conference was held just 2 days after the incident, broadcast live to millions of viewers. Standing behind a podium adorned with the airline's logo, the CEO spoke with a clarity and poise that commanded attention. Today, we are facing a challenge that goes beyond one individual or one moment, he began. This incident is not just about what happened on Flight 723. It's about the deeper issues within our industry and society as a whole. He didn't shy away from addressing the specifics of the event, acknowledging the slap and the emotions it stirred among passengers and employees alike. What occurred on that flight was unacceptable, he said firmly. But it also serves as a wake-up call, a reminder that discrimination, bias, and unprofessional behavior have no place in aviation or anywhere else. His words resonated deeply, striking a balance between accountability and hope. He emphasized that while individuals must be held responsible for their actions, systemic failures also needed to be addressed. To that end, he announced several initiatives aimed at fostering a more inclusive and respectful workplace culture. These included mandatory diversity training for all employees, partnerships with organizations focused on combating racial bias, and a $1 million pledge toward programs promoting equality in travel. The audience listened intently, many nodding in agreement. For some, the measures felt long overdue. For others, they represented a bold step forward. But even as the CEO outlined these plans, questions lingered about the fate of the flight attendant. Would she lose her job? Could she ever rebuild her career after such a public humiliation? Behind the scenes, the flight attendant wrestled with those same questions. Days turned into weeks as she grappled with shame and regret. She couldn't stop replaying the moment in her mind, the slap, the stunned faces of the passengers, the revelation of who the man really was. It haunted her, not just because of the consequences, but because she realized how easily assumptions and biases could cloud judgment. Determined to make amends, she sought professional help, enrolling in therapy, sessions to unpack the emotions and triggers that had fueled her outburst. Through counseling, she began to confront uncomfortable truths about herself, about the stressors of her job, the unconscious prejudices she hadn't even realized she carried, and the ways in which she could do better moving forward. As part of her healing process, she decided to write a letter, an apology not just to the CEO but to everyone affected by her actions. Pouring her heart onto paper, she expressed genuine remorse for the pain she had caused. "I failed you," she wrote. "Not only did I fail as a professional, but I failed as a human being. I want to take full responsibility for my actions and prove that I can learn from this mistake." When the letter reached the CEO's desk, he read it carefully, his expression thoughtful. While the slap had been deeply humiliating, he recognized that the flight attendant's apology came from a place of sincerity. After much deliberation, he made a surprising decision. Instead of terminating her employment outright, he offered her a chance to redeem herself, not as a flight attendant, but as part of Skyline's new anti-bias initiative. The offer came with conditions, of course. She would need to complete intensive training, both in conflict resolution and cultural sensitivity. She would also have to share her story openly, using her experience as a teaching tool for others. It wouldn't be easy, she knew that, but it was a lifeline, a way to turn her lowest moment into something meaningful. When the CEO called her to discuss the proposal, the conversation was raw and emotional. Sitting across from him in a quiet office at Skyline's headquarters, the flight attendant fought back tears as she listened to his words. "This isn't just about forgiving you," he said gently. "It's about giving you, and others like you, a chance to grow. You have an opportunity here to make a real difference." She nodded, her voice trembling as she replied, "Thank you, I won't waste this chance, I promise." Their meeting marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her, but for the entire airline. Over the following months, Skyline rolled out its revamped training programs, incorporating real-life scenarios and personal testimonies to drive home the importance of respect and empathy. The flight attendant played a key role in developing the curriculum, drawing from her own experiences to create content that resonated with employees at every level. Publicly, the airline worked tirelessly to rebuild trust. Advertisements highlighted their commitment to inclusivity, featuring diverse voices and stories that reflected the true spirit of travel. Internally, employees noticed a shift in the company culture, with leadership encouraging open dialogue and accountability. For the BIAO CEO, the incident became a catalyst for transformation. He used his platform to advocate for broader change within the aviation industry, speaking at conferences and collaborating with other airlines to promote best practices. His leadership inspired admiration worldwide, earning him accolades as a champion of progress. As for the flight attendant, her journey was far from over. Redemption didn't come overnight, and there were days when self-doubt crept in. But with each training session she led, each apology she shared, she felt a little lighter, as if she was slowly shedding the weight of her past mistakes. Together, the CEO and the flight attendant proved that even in moments of profound failure, there is always room for forgiveness, learning, and growth. Their story became a testament to the power of accountability and the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that no matter how far we fall, we can always rise again. And so, what began as a single misstep on a routine flight evolved into a movement, one that challenged perceptions, sparked conversations, and ultimately brought about meaningful change. Little did anyone know, this was just the start of a larger narrative, one that would continue to inspire for years to come. The days following the incident were a whirlwind of activity for everyone involved. For the flight attendant, life felt like it had been turned upside down. Every morning, she woke up dreading what the day might bring. Another news article dissecting her actions, another viral video resurfacing online, or another comment from strangers judging her without knowing the full story. She avoided social media altogether, unable to stomach the harsh criticism and memes that mocked her mistake. At the same time, she couldn't ignore the reality of what had happened. The slap wasn't just an isolated act. It was a symptom of deeper issues, stress, bias, and a lack of self-control that she needed to confront head-on. Her suspension gave her plenty of time to reflect, but it also left her feeling isolated. Friends and family tried their best to support her, reminding her that people make mistakes and that this didn't define her as a person. Still, the weight of public shame pressed heavily on her shoulders. One evening, sitting alone in her apartment, she broke down in tears. "What if I never work again?" she whispered to herself, staring at the wall. "What if I've ruined everything?" But even in her darkest moments, she knew she had to take responsibility. Running away from the problem wasn't an option, not when so many people were watching, waiting to see how she would respond. So, with the encouragement of her loved ones, she decided to face her fears. She enrolled in therapy, not just to process her emotions, but to understand why she had reacted the way she did. Through those sessions, she began to uncover uncomfortable truths about herself, the unconscious biases she hadn't realized she carried, the stressors of her job that had worn her down over the years, and the anger she sometimes suppressed until it boiled over. Therapy wasn't easy. There were days when she wanted to quit, convinced she'd never be able to change, but slowly she started to see progress. Her counselor helped her develop tools to manage her emotions better, teaching her techniques to stay calm under pressure. They also worked on identifying triggers, things that might push her toward losing control, and finding healthier ways to respond. It was hard, humbling work, but she stuck with it because deep down, she wanted to be better. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had been hurt by her actions. While the flight attendant focused on personal growth, the airline faced its own challenges. Skyline Airways found itself in the crosshairs of public scrutiny, with customers questioning whether the company truly valued equality and professionalism. Social media buzzed with calls for accountability, and some passengers vowed to boycott, the airline altogether. Shareholders grew nervous, worried about the financial impact of the scandal. Internally, employees debated whether the punishment fit the crime, while externally, critics demanded systemic changes to prevent similar incidents. In the future, amidst the chaos, the CEO took decisive action. He knew this moment offered an opportunity, not just to address the immediate fallout, but to drive lasting change within the organization. Under his leadership, Skyline launched a comprehensive review of its policies and practices, examining everything from employee training programs to customer service protocols. The goal was clear: to create an environment where respect and inclusivity weren't just buzzwords but core values embedded in every aspect of the business. One of the first steps was introducing mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all staff members. These sessions went beyond basic awareness, delving into real-world scenarios and encouraging open dialogue about race, bias, and privilege. Employees were invited to share their own experiences, fostering a sense of community and understanding. For many, these discussions were eye-opening, challenging preconceived notions and sparking meaningful conversations. At the same time, the airline invested in improving working conditions for its frontline workers. Long hours, low pay, and high stress had long been part of the job for flight attendants and ground crew, contributing to burnout and frustration. Recognizing this, Skyline implemented new measures to support its employees, including flexible scheduling options, mental health resources, and regular check-ins with managers to address concerns before they escalated. Despite these efforts, rebuilding trust took time. Customers were skeptical, and some remained critical of the airline's response. To win them back, Skyline launched a transparent marketing campaign, highlighting the steps it was taking to improve. Advertisements featured testimonials from employees and passengers alike, emphasizing the importance of empathy and respect in travel. The message was simple yet powerful: everyone deserves to feel safe and valued when flying. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the CEO continued to advocate for broader change within the aviation industry. He attended conferences, participated in panel discussions, and collaborated with other airlines to promote best practices. His vision extended beyond Skyline. He wanted to inspire a cultural shift across the entire sector, one that prioritized humanity over profit. For the flight attendant, the turning point came when she received an unexpected invitation. The CEO asked her to meet with him personally to discuss her role in the company's anti-bias initiative. Nervous but hopeful, she agreed, unsure of what to expect. When they sat down together, he listened intently as she shared her journey, her struggles, her lessons learned, and her desire to make amends. Moved by her sincerity, he offered her a chance to contribute meaningfully to the program, using her experience to educate others. "It won't be easy," he warned her. "People will have strong opinions about you, and there will be days when it feels like you're fighting an uphill battle. But if you're willing to put in the work, you can help us create something truly impactful." She accepted the offer without hesitation, knowing it was both a challenge and an opportunity. Over the next few months, she threw herself into developing the curriculum, drawing from her therapy sessions and personal reflections to craft content that resonated with employees at every level. She included real-life examples, interactive exercises, and candid discussions about the consequences of unchecked bias. Her goal was simple: to ensure no one else made the same mistakes she had. As word of her involvement spread, reactions were mixed. Some praised her courage and willingness to learn from her past, while others remained skeptical, questioning whether she deserved a second chance. But she didn't let the negativity deter her. Instead, she channeled her energy into making the program a success, determined to prove that redemption was possible. Slowly but surely, things began to change, not just for her, but for the entire airline. Employees noticed a shift in the workplace culture. With leadership encouraging open communication and accountability, passengers reported feeling more respected and cared for during their flights. And while the road ahead was still long, there was a renewed sense of hope, a belief that even in the face of failure, growth and transformation were achievable. For The flight attendant, each step forward, brought a little more peace. She knew she couldn't erase what had happened, nor could she undo the pain she had caused. But she could use her experience to help others avoid similar pitfalls. In doing so, she discovered a newfound purpose, one that reminded her of the power of resilience, forgiveness, and the human capacity to change. And though the world continued to watch closely, waiting to see how the story unfolded, one thing was certain. This chapter was far from over. Months had passed since the infamous incident on Flight 723, and while life for both the flight attendant and the CEO had moved forward, neither of them was quite the same. The ripple effects of that single moment continued to shape their lives, and the airline they were tied to in profound ways. For the flight attendant, every day felt like walking a tightrope. She knew she couldn't erase what had happened, but she was determined to prove that people could change. Her journey wasn't easy, but it was real, raw, and deeply human. She threw herself into her new role with Skyline's anti-bias initiative, pouring her heart into developing training modules that were honest, relatable, and impactful. Drawing from her own experiences, she crafted scenarios that highlighted how quickly assumptions and biases could escalate into harmful actions. During workshops, she didn't shy away from sharing her story, how stress, fatigue, and unconscious prejudice had led her to make a decision she regretted for the rest of her life. Standing in front of groups of employees, she spoke openly about the shame she'd felt after slapping the CEO, the public backlash that followed, and the difficult process of self-reflection that helped her grow. Her vulnerability resonated with many. Some attendees nodded along as she described moments when they too had let emotions get the better of them at work. Others admitted they had judged her harshly when the story first broke, only to realize now that everyone makes mistakes, and what mattered most was how you responded afterward. There were even a few who approached her privately after sessions, thanking her for being brave enough to share her truth. Those small interactions reminded her why this work mattered, but not everyone was supportive. Skeptics remained, questioning whether someone who had caused such harm deserved a second chance. Anonymous comments on social media accused her of exploiting the situation for attention or using it as a way to save face. At times, these criticisms stung deeply, making her question whether she would ever truly be forgiven. Yet, she learned to focus less on what others thought and more on the impact she could have. Every time an employee came up to her after a session saying they felt inspired to do better, she knew she was on the right path. For the CEO, the months following the incident brought its own set of challenges and opportunities. As the public face of the company during one of its darkest moments, he faced immense pressure to restore trust, not just among passengers but also within his own team. He spent countless hours meeting with employees, listening to their concerns, and addressing fears about job security amid the scandal. He emphasized transparency, holding town hall meetings where staff members could voice their opinions freely without fear of judgment. These conversations weren't always comfortable, but they fostered a sense of unity and shared purpose. Beyond internal efforts, the CEO became a vocal advocate for systemic change across the aviation industry. He traveled extensively, speaking at conferences and collaborating with other airlines to promote inclusivity and accountability. His message was clear. No organization was immune to the issues of bias and discrimination, but progress required courage and commitment. He challenged leaders to look beyond profits and prioritize humanity, urging them to create environments where every passenger and employee felt valued. Back at Skyline, the changes sparked by the incident began to take root. Employees noticed a shift in leadership's approach, with executives actively seeking feedback and addressing grievances. Policies around workplace conduct were updated, ensuring clearer guidelines and consequences for inappropriate behavior. Training programs expanded beyond diversity and sensitivity to include mental health support and conflict resolution strategies. Slowly but surely, the culture of the airline transformed, one conversation, one policy, one interaction at a time. Passengers also started to notice differences. Interactions with flight attendants and ground crew felt warmer and more genuine. Complaints about rude or dismissive treatment dropped significantly, replaced by compliments about professionalism and care. Social media posts praising Skyline's improved service began to outnumber negative ones, signaling a turning point in public perception. It wasn't perfect, there were still bumps along the way, but the effort was undeniable. As the months went by, the relationship between the flight attendant and the CEO evolved into something unexpected: mutual respect. Their initial encounter had been fraught with tension and embarrassment, but through their shared commitment to change, they found common ground. They met regularly to discuss the progress of the anti-bias initiative, exchanging ideas and insights. Over coffee one afternoon, the CEO opened up about his own struggles growing up as a person of color in corporate America. He shared stories of subtle microaggressions and overt discrimination he'd faced throughout his career, explaining how those experiences shaped his drive to lead with empathy and integrity. Listening to him, the flight attendant realized how much weight he carried, not just as the head of a major airline but as a symbol of hope for marginalized communities. His calm demeanor masked years of resilience, and she admired him all the more for it. She confided in him about her fears of never fully regaining trust, her frustration with critics who refused to see her growth, and her determination to keep pushing forward despite it all. Their conversations became a source of strength for both of them, reminding them that even in moments of adversity, connection and understanding could flourish. By the end of the year, the anti-bias program had reached thousands of employees, earning praise from industry experts and advocacy groups alike. Passengers wrote letters commending Skyline for its renewed focus on inclusivity, while employees expressed gratitude for the tools and resources provided to help them navigate challenging situations. The flight attendant's role in shaping the initiative earned her recognition within the company, though she remained humble, insisting that the credit belonged to everyone working toward positive change. Still, she couldn't ignore the personal growth she'd experienced along the way. Therapy had taught her to manage her emotions better, while the workshops forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. She learned to listen more, judge less, and approach every interaction with curiosity rather than assumption. Most importantly, she discovered a newfound sense of purpose, one that reminded her of the power of redemption and the importance of treating others with dignity and respect. The CEO, meanwhile, reflected on the broader impact of the incident. What had started as a humiliating moment on a plane had become a catalyst for transformation, not just for Skyline Airways but for the entire aviation industry. By choosing grace over retribution, he had shown that leadership wasn't about punishing mistakes but guiding people toward growth. And in doing so, he had inspired countless others to embrace accountability and empathy in their own lives. As the calendar turned to a new year, both the flight attendant and the CEO stood side by side at a press event announcing the success of the anti-bias initiative. Cameras flashed as reporters fired questions about the future of the airline and the lessons learned from the past. But amidst the noise, there was a quiet understanding between the two of them, an acknowledgement that their shared journey had changed them forever. For the flight attendant, it was proof that even in your lowest moments, you could rise again. For the CEO, it was validation that compassion and leadership could spark meaningful change. Together, they proved that humanity, resilience, and forgiveness weren't just ideals, they were choices we made every day. And as they looked out at the crowd, they knew this was only the beginning of a larger movement, one that would continue to inspire for years to come. 1 year after the infamous incident on Flight 723, Skyline Airways unveiled its revamped training program, a bold step toward creating a more inclusive and respectful workplace. The event was held at the airline's headquarters, with executives, employees, journalists, and industry leaders in attendance. It was a moment of reflection, celebration, and renewed hope for everyone involved. For the flight attendant who had once been at the center of a scandal, it marked the culmination of a journey that had tested her resilience, forced her to confront her flaws, and ultimately transformed her into an advocate for change. Standing beside the CEO on stage, she took a deep breath before speaking. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the microphone, but her voice remained steady. A year ago, she began, pausing briefly to collect herself. I made a mistake that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I let my assumptions, my biases, and my emotions get the better of me. And because of that, I hurt someone, and not just anyone, but the very person who gave me this second chance. The room fell silent as she continued. What happened on that plane wasn't just about me or him. It was about something bigger, the way we treat each other, the judgments we make without even realizing it, and the harm those actions can cause. I'm here today because I want to help prevent others from making the same mistakes I did. Her words resonated deeply with the audience. Some nodded in agreement, others wiped away tears. She went on to describe how therapy had helped her understand the unconscious biases she carried, and how workshops like the ones they were launching could empower people to recognize and address their own blind spots. Change doesn't happen overnight, she admitted. But if we commit to learning, listening, and growing, we can create a world where everyone feels valued, whether they're stepping onto a plane as a passenger or showing up for work as part of the crew. When she finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. The CEO stepped forward next, his expression warm and proud as he looked at her. This is what leadership looks like, he said, gesturing toward her. It's not about never making mistakes, it's about owning them, learning from them, and using them to drive positive change. He then turned his attention to the broader impact of the initiative. Over the past year, thousands of employees had participated in the anti-bias training program, sharing feedback that had shaped its evolution. Stories poured in from across the company, flight attendants who had diffused tense situations with empathy, gate agents who had gone out of their way to assist passengers in need, and pilots who had fostered stronger connections with their teams. These small acts added up to something significant, a cultural shift within Skyline Airways. To highlight the program's success, the CEO shared a video featuring testimonials from employees and passengers alike. One flight attendant recounted how the training had taught her to pause and think before reacting during stressful moments. A passenger praised the kindness shown by a crew member when his child became upset mid-flight. Another employee described how the workshops had opened his eyes to the subtle ways bias could creep into everyday interactions, and how he now actively worked to challenge those patterns. The video ended with a powerful message. Respect starts here. As the screen faded to black, the CEO reiterated the importance of continuing this work. We've come a long way, he said, but there's still much to be done. This isn't just about fixing one problem, it's about building a foundation for lasting change. Together, we can ensure that every person who steps onto one of our planes feels safe, respected, and valued. The event concluded with a standing ovation, but for the flight attendant, the real victory lay in the connections she'd forged along the way. Afterward, dozens of colleagues approached her to express their support and gratitude. Some thanked her for her honesty. Others shared their own struggles with bias and burnout. Each conversation reminded her that while the road to redemption had been difficult, it had also brought her closer to the people around her. In the weeks that followed, the airline saw a surge in positive feedback from passengers. Social media, posts praising Skyline's improved service flooded timelines, and customer satisfaction ratings reached an all-time high. Industry publications hailed the company as a leader in promoting inclusivity, with many calling the anti-bias initiative a model for other airlines to follow. Shareholders, once wary of the scandal's financial impact, expressed optimism about the future, citing the program's success as evidence of strong leadership and innovation. For the flight attendant, life began to feel lighter. Though the memory of that fateful day would always linger, it no longer defined her. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far she'd come, and how much she had yet to accomplish. She continued leading workshops, traveling to different hubs to train employees and share her story. Along the way, she discovered a passion for mentoring others, particularly those struggling with similar challenges. Her journey inspired countless individuals to confront their own biases and strive for personal growth. As for the CEO, his advocacy extended beyond Skyline Airways. He partnered with organizations focused on diversity and inclusion, lending his voice to campaigns aimed at dismantling systemic barriers in the aviation industry. His efforts earned him widespread recognition, including awards for ethical leadership and social responsibility. Yet despite the accolades, he remained grounded, often crediting the flight attendant for playing a pivotal role in driving change. Their partnership became a symbol of what was possible when accountability met compassion. They proved that even in moments of profound failure, there was room for forgiveness, learning, and transformation. Their story sparked conversations far beyond the confines of the airline industry, inspiring businesses and communities worldwide to prioritize empathy and humanity. On the anniversary of the incident, the flight attendant boarded a plane, not as crew but as a passenger. As she settled into her seat, she glanced around the cabin, taking in the familiar sights and sounds. The hum of engines, the chatter of travelers, the gentle click of overhead compartments closing, it all felt comforting now. When the captain welcomed passengers aboard, she smiled, knowing firsthand the hard work and dedication that went into ensuring every flight ran smoothly. Looking out the window as the plane ascended, she reflected on everything that had transpired over the past year. What had started as a single misstep had evolved into a movement, one that challenged perceptions, sparked dialogue, and ultimately brought about meaningful change. She thought about the CEO, the colleagues who had supported her, and the countless strangers whose lives had been touched by the program she helped create. And as the clouds stretched endlessly below, she allowed herself a quiet moment of pride. She hadn't just survived the storm. She had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to make a difference. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful, not just for herself but for the future of the airline, its employees, and the millions of passengers who would continue to take to the skies. Because in the end, flying wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was about connecting with others, with ourselves, and with the world around us. And thanks to the lessons learned from a single slap heard round the world, Skyline Airways had taken a giant leap toward ensuring those connections were built on respect, understanding, and humanity.